So imagine standing on a dusty, sun-baked hill.
Just completely sweltering.
Yeah, exactly. You are taxed into absolute poverty, your land is heavily occupied by a foreign military, and you've just hiked for days.
Literally days.
Right, days. Just to hear the man everyone whispers is going to, lead the violent rebellion that will finally set your people free.
That's the expectation, yeah.
So you're standing in this massive, furious crowd waiting for the battle cry. You're waiting for him to tell you to take up arms. And instead, the leader looks at you and tells you to go literally hug a Roman soldier.
It is honestly the ultimate subversion of expectations.
No, big time.
And, well, because we're dealing with a text today that is both a religious cornerstone and a highly charged political document, we need to lay some ground rules.
Right, the impartiality disclaimer.
Exactly. Our mission in this deep dive into the source material is strictly as historical observers. We aren't here to take theological sides or, endorse any specific religious viewpoint.
No, not at all.
We're just here to look at the raw source material, which is a historical and political prep document covering Matthew chapter 5, and understand exactly why this specific speech caused such a massive historical earthquake.
Yeah, that historical lens is crucial here. Today we're analyzing what is widely known as the Sermon on the Mount, which was delivered somewhere around 26 to 31 AD near Capernaum in Galilee.
Right.
And the mission today is to completely shatter that pristine, stained glass window view of this event.
Oh, totally. We have to shatter that.
Because when you look at the actual crowd gathered that day, it wasn't some polite, quiet church service. It was a powder keg.
A literal powder keg.
We're talking about sprawling multitudes gathered from Judea, Jerusalem, Tyre, and Sidon. People who left their homes and walked for days just to be there.
And, to understand why they walked that far, you have to understand the suffocating realities of their daily lives.
Right, it was bad.
Really bad. All of this is happening under the heavy, oppressive shadow of Roman occupation. I mean, Galilee and Judea were not free regions.
They're not even close.
The citizens were living under the constant weight of an imperial military presence. And that meant crushing, inescapable taxes that funneled their wealth straight back to Rome.
Just draining the local economy.
Exactly. It meant political powerlessness. And it meant an incredibly angry, desperate population experiencing widespread social and economic unrest.
Which I think brings up a fundamental question about human motivation. Why were these massive crowds flocking to Jesus in the first place?
Well, the source notes they wanted healing.
Sure, healing. But if we read between the lines of this historical unrest, they were desperate for a permanent political solution.
Right. The core tension outlined in the source is that the crowds were essentially looking for a militaristic conqueror.
They wanted a general.
Yes. The dominant expectation of the day was that a messianic figure would arise to lead a literal armed rebellion. They wanted someone to shatter what they called the Roman yoke.
Wow.
The goal was to aggressively overthrow the occupiers, reclaim their land, and deliver economic prosperity through a violent, decisive uprising.
Okay, let's unpack this from the perspective of the listener. Think about your own ultimate deal breaker. If you're listening to this right now, imagine someone telling you to actively aid the person who is systemically ruining your life and oppressing your family.
It's unthinkable.
Right. You show up to this fierce underground rebel rally waiting for the signal to fight back. And instead of declaring war, Jesus introduces a framework of radical ethics.
He demands radical mercy, which to that specific crowd felt like profound disappointment.
I bet they were furious.
Oh, absolutely. The text points specifically to Matthew 5.44, where Jesus says, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you."
Wow.
Yeah. To a massive gathering hungry for a violent revolution, this was deeply destabilizing.
It's like letting all the air out of the tires.
Exactly. His explicit command to turn the other cheek wasn't just a nice moral platitude. It directly undermined the burning, visceral desires for armed retaliation against their Roman overlords.
So he's effectively taking the air completely out of the rebellion's tires. And logically, that makes you think about his survival strategy.
Right, the politics of it.
Yeah, because if Jesus is out there actively disappointing the anti-Roman rebels by preaching nonviolence, you would assume he is trying to align himself with the local religious establishment to gain some political safety.
That would be the smart political move, sure.
If you're going to alienate the massive, angry mob, you had better make friends with the powerful elite. But the drama in this source document reveals he does the exact opposite.
He alienates them immediately. and intentionally.
Wait, really
Oh,
intentionally?
yeah. To understand the mechanics of this, we have to look at how the religious landscape of the era operated. It was entirely dominated by the scribes and the Pharisees.
Right, the experts.
They were the recognized, credentialed experts who controlled the interpretation of the Torah, the Jewish law. But over time, the source notes that they had transformed the law into this incredibly heavy burden of rigid rules. Their framework focused almost exclusively on outward adherence.
So checking boxes.
Exactly. It was all about visible boundary markers. Who was in, who was out, who was clean, who was unclean. It wasn't about fostering any genuine internal love for God and neighbor.
And the optics of how Jesus responds to this are fascinating. The source specifically highlights that Jesus delivered this sermon from an elevated seat.
Yes.
That isn't just a casual posture for getting comfortable on a hill.
No. Taking that elevated seat is a direct physical claim to rabbinic authority. It was the accepted posture of a teacher claiming the absolute right to interpret the law.
Oh, wow.
And from that seated position of authority, he completely upends the Pharisees' entire system.
Just throws it out.
Well, what's fascinating here is that Jesus didn't just disagree with their interpretations. He demanded a righteousness that actually surpassed them.
How so?
He states in Matthew 5:20, "For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven."
That is a direct public shot at the people holding all the institutional power in that society.
It is effectively a declaration of war on the religious establishment. He's taking aim at the intellectual heavyweights of the day.
The big guys.
Yeah. The source mentions he positioned himself against both the conservative school of Shammai and the progressive school of Hillel.
Okay, wait. Give me a modern comparison for that.
To put that in modern terms, imagine a politician today standing up and simultaneously alienating the extreme wings of both major political parties
Oh, boy.
by telling them their entire foundational framework is wrong. The school of Shammai were strict, unyielding traditionalists. The school of Hillel were slightly more liberal, but still deeply entrenched in the rigid rule book. And Jesus just bypasses both of them.
Wait, let me push back on this for a second.
Sure.
If he is up there publicly tossing out the accepted rules, alienating both major schools of thought, and angering the credentialed experts, wasn't he just proving their point?
In what way?
Wasn't he essentially validating the Pharisees' accusations that he was just a lawless rebel trying to destroy their tradition?
That is exactly the accusation they leveled against him. And frankly, it's a very logical conclusion for them to draw based on his behavior.
Right.
But the source points us to Matthew 5:17, where Jesus explicitly defends against this accusation of lawlessness. He says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them."
Okay, so he's not destroying it.
No, he isn't throwing the rule book away. He's claiming to be the ultimate target that the rule book was pointing toward all along.
But how does someone actually execute that? What is the mechanism for fulfilling the law while simultaneously infuriating every single expert who has dedicated their entire life to studying it?
He executes it through a rhetorical device the source identifies as the antitheses.
The antithesis.
Right. Throughout the sermon, Jesus repeatedly uses a very specific formula. "You have heard that it was said, but I tell you."
Ah, okay.
He takes the established external law that the Pharisees policed, and he moves the target entirely to the internal heart.
So he tackles things like anger, adultery, divorce, and retaliation.
Precisely. The Pharisees were judging a person's righteousness by whether they committed the physical external act of murder or adultery.
If you didn't do it, you're fine.
Yeah, if you didn't physically do it, you were legally in the clear. But Jesus shifts the standard to the internal motivations, the unseen anger and the hidden lust.
Wow.
He makes the standard impossibly high by focusing purely on heart obedience, and that completely strips the Pharisees of their ability to police and control the population through external behavioral checklists.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. When we read this today, it is so easy to think it's just about personal, quiet piety.
Just being a good person.
Right. We reduce it to just being a good person in your own private heart. But the source makes it clear this is a massive societal disruption happening right under the watchful, heavy shadow of the Roman Empire.
Oh, it's extremely disruptive.
For example, the document talks about Jesus forbidding oaths. At first glance, reading that today, it sounds like a, minor, boring religious technicality.
It sounds archaic.
But when you look at the historical context, it's actually like a modern-day radical consumer protection campaign.
It fundamentally rewrites the rules of commerce.
Yeah.
Because in the first century marketplace, taking an oath wasn't just about telling the truth in a courtroom. It was how business was conducted.
It was the contract.
Exactly. But the religious elite had created complex, legalistic tiers of oaths. If you swore by Jerusalem, the oath was binding. But if you swore by the gold of Jerusalem, you suddenly had a legal loophole to back out of a business deal.
That is so shady.
It was a rigged system, designed to let the rich and educated legally scam the poor and uneducated.
It's literally the ancient equivalent of burying a predatory clause on page 40 of a terms of service agreement, knowing the other person can't read it.
That's a great analogy.
By telling his followers to simply let their yes be yes and their no be no, Jesus is completely dismantling the legal loopholes that allowed widespread economic exploitation. He is taking a direct swing at the corrupt financial practices of his day.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you see Jesus actively dismantling the machinery that kept the vulnerable oppressed.
Yeah.
And it went beyond just commerce. He was addressing the core of their social interactions, specifically honor-shame violence.
Right. Honor was everything.
In the first century, retaliation was a cultural necessity. If someone shamed you or struck you, you had to strike back to reclaim your honor and social standing.
You couldn't just let it go.
No. Society wouldn't let you. So by commanding his followers not to retaliate, to turn the other cheek, he is forcefully disrupting the toxic, violent cultural norms that dictated everyday survival.
Man. So if you strip away the violent rebellion and you strip away the corrupt financial loopholes and you strip away the honor-shame violence, you are left with a society that has no idea how to measure success anymore.
The old metrics are gone.
Exactly. If wealth, power, and the ability to violently defend your honor are no longer the metrics, who actually wins in this new system?
And that is the exact question he answers in his opening lines, which the source calls the Beatitudes.
Right, the famous Beatitudes.
The Beatitudes set the entire operational tone for this new radical kingdom. Look at Matthew 5.3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
It's upside down.
Completely. Jesus is completely subverting the world's power hierarchies. In the Roman world, and honestly in most of human history, blessings, honor, and resources go to the strong, the wealthy, and the victorious.
Yeah, the winners.
But Jesus stands on that hill and pronounces blessings upon the marginalized, the mourners, and the meek.
He's looking at the people at the absolute bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. The people who are crushed by Roman taxes and scammed by Pharisaical loopholes and saying, you are the ones who hold value in this new system.
Yes.
And he goes even further. He calls these marginalized, oppressed followers the salt of the earth and the light of the world.
Huge titles.
The source highlights Matthew 5.14, where he says, a town built on a hill cannot be hidden. He isn't asking for a secret underground philosophy here.
No, not at all.
He is calling for highly visible, undeniable cultural transformation.
He is demanding that their new ethic be lived out in the open marketplace, in their homes, and in their interactions with the occupying military.
Wow.
It was meant to be a direct, blinding contrast to the darkness of the surrounding culture. It was supposed to be a visible alternative society.
So what does this all mean for his followers? Like, how did the people closest to him handle this? Because the source indicates the drama wasn't just external.
Oh, the internal drama was intense.
Yeah. Because he's fighting the Roman expectations of the massive crowds, he's fighting the intellectual dominance of the Pharisees, but the tension was also thick inside his own camp.
This raises an important question about human ambition. The document reveals a severe internal struggle regarding that exact thing.
Really. Even among his inner circle.
Even among Jesus' closest disciples, there was intense, dramatic tension. You have to remember the context that Jesus was gaining massive fame.
Rock star status.
Exactly. Multitudes were following him across the region. And naturally, in any political or social movement, close proximity to a rising star brings prestige.
Of course it does.
His own hand-picked followers were heavily tempted by pride and the desire for earthly authority.
That is wild. They were listening to him preach, blessed are the meek, but in their heads, they are already sizing up corner offices.
Right.
They still wanted those high-ranking cabinet positions in the new government they assumed he was about to establish.
That is exactly the disconnect. They were arguing amongst themselves about who would be the greatest in this new kingdom.
Unbelievable.
So Jesus had to actively, repeatedly warn them against seeking fame and fortune. The entire sermon we are discussing is, in many ways, a direct rebuke of his own disciples' mindset.
He's checking his own team.
Yeah. He is demanding inward, Hard obedience and humility over any kind of earthly positioning or political leverage. He was quite literally fighting a war on three fronts.
Three fronts. Okay, let's list them.
You had the violent political expectations of the masses, the rigid religious dogmatism of the elite, and the selfish corporate ambition of his own inner circle.
Man. When you look at all those layers, the economic drain, the military occupation, the religious corruption, the internal ambition, that stained glass window view of the sermon is completely gone.
Shattered.
This wasn't a polite fireside chat. This was a...
Given the intense economic exploitation of the day, the heavy Roman boot on their necks, and the massive crowd's desperate, visceral thirst for a violent revolution, how much of this text's original shock value is completely lost when we read it comfortably in the modern era?
A lot of it, I'd say.
Imagine standing on that dusty hill as an oppressed, angry first-century citizen. Knowing what we know now about the political climate, would you have actually possessed the courage to embrace this radical, nonviolent ethic?
That's tough.
Or would you have walked away from this disappointing Messiah in sheer frustration?
Wow. That is the exact question we want you to answer right now. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on today's historical drama. Seriously, if you were standing on that hill, suffocating under Roman taxes and wanting a revolution, would you have stayed to embrace the nonviolent ethic, or would you have walked away?
That's a hard question.
Let us know in the comments. And hey, if you enjoyed today's deep dive into the source material, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our future discussions.
Definitely subscribe.
Also, take a second to check the description box below for exclusive links related to the show. We've got some great stuff down there.
Oh yeah, lots of good resources.
And listen, you think the political tension in this deep dive was heavy? Make sure you're subscribed, because our next deep dive is going to be even more intense. See you then.